Thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's wonderful to see this room so full, having so many people here to listen to the topics, and what wonderful speakers that you'll hear from tonight. I'm honored to be present with them. So I think probably the first question people will ask is, how did I get here? How did I get to be the executive director of Death Penalty Focus? Many people are surprised that an ex-warden of San Quentin would be opposed to the death penalty. But I must tell you that I would be surprised if the warden of any prison that carried out executions wasn't opposed to the death penalty. So let me just tell you a little bit about my career and my experience and how I became the warden at San Quentin. I started at San Quentin State Prison in 1978, 2 weeks after graduating from Sonoma State University with a degree in criminal justice. When I arrived at San Quentin, there were 6 inmates on death row. I promoted up through the ranks, and in 1999, Governor Davis appointed me to be the warden of San Quentin. I left San Quentin in 2004 when Governor Schwarzenegger appointed me to be the director of the California Department of Corrections. When I left San Quentin State Prison, there was a little over 650 inmates on San Quentin's death row. I watched death row grow over those many years, and I feel like I've seen it from every point of view. But I want to tell you that I care about public safety. I care enough to spend a lifetime studying criminal justice. I know what works and I know what doesn't work. And the death penalty, plain and simply, is costly, ineffective, and fails to improve our lives in any way. There is something for everyone, whether you're liberal, conservative, or somewhere in between, to dislike about the death penalty. Having spent all those years at San Quentin and carrying out 4 executions, there are very few people who can talk about this topic as I can, and you heard from one warden. I wish you'd seen the whole film. It's just so powerful. But it is important that people like me stand up and say that it's time to end the death penalty. Morally, I've always been opposed to the death penalty. But I'm not here today to talk about the morality of the death penalty. I'm here today to talk about the death penalty as a failed public policy that serves no one. And let me begin with the cost. You heard some of the figures earlier, but I think they're worth repeating. And it's worth knowing where these figures come from. Because it is you in this room that must go out and educate your neighbors about the cost of the death penalty and why they should vote yes on Proposition 34. So our figures come from the Alarcon-Mitchell report. Judge Alarcon is a Ninth Circuit Court judge who believes in capital punishment. Paula Mitchell is his law clerk, and she's opposed to the death penalty. They studied this issue for over 5 years and had access to court documents and costs that you and I don't get to see. As a result of their 5-year study, this is what they came to conclude. We have spent $4 billion on the death penalty since 1978. We have carried out 13 executions in the state of California, and that means that each execution cost us over $300 million. If we continue to have the death penalty, we will spend $9 billion on the death penalty by 2030. That the death penalty cost us $184 million more per year above the cost of giving those same individuals life without possibility of parole. And these numbers don't include the need to build a new death row. And if we continue with the death penalty in the state of California, we will have to build a new death row because San Quentin can no longer continue to house the growing numbers of death row inmates. And so what does it really cost us in terms of public safety? It's important to know that on average, 46% of homicides and 56% of rapes go unsolved each year in the state of California. And I know, and you know, that cities all over California have been laying off police officers. In addition to that, I don't know how many of you saw in the newspaper just this week, in the city and county of Los Angeles, they have had to stop processing fingerprints because they don't have the money to hire the analysts who process fingerprints. So if for non-serious, non-violent crimes, they're limiting each police precinct to 10 fingerprints a month being processed. That's what the death penalty is costing us. So what is the best use of our criminal justice dollars? Well, for me, as a person who spent 30 years in law enforcement, I turn to the science. And what does the science say about criminal justice? It says the best way to prevent crime is to solve it. It also says that it also shows, and there's many studies, that when you have more police on the streets, it makes our children, our neighborhoods, and our communities safer. And I will just give you one wonderful example, and that is New York. New York uses evidence-based policing. They put more police on the streets. Their crime rate in every major category is 40% less than the state of California in New York. Then when you look at Oakland, California, the former police chief of Oakland, on one weekend, he decided to put out extra police officers because they had had so many shootings. And on that weekend, no one was killed. And he said, if I could put the police on the street that I need to be out there every day, I could stop these homicides. So the death penalty is not a deterrent. And so if you're following the science of criminal justice, why do we have the death penalty when it costs us so much? But we have to look at what voters think about this. And many people believe in retribution. And if some of our voters do believe in retribution, and if that is what you believe in, that it's important to know that life without possibility of parole is a very harsh punishment. I worked in corrections, as I said, for almost 30 years, and I sat on classification committees for every newly arrived death row inmate. Many of those inmates asked for the death penalty because they could not bear the thought of spending the rest of their life in prison. And I think it's important to talk about that and to talk to the voters that you know about that issue when they bring that up. What is the difference between being on death row and serving life without possibility of parole? When you're on death row, you get a single cell. When you're on death row, you have a legal team for your entire life. When you're on death row, you're allowed to go to the exercise yard 7 days per week, 6 hours a day. If you have life without possibility of parole, you can earn those privileges, but they're not given to you. If you have life without possibility of parole, you can work and you can earn greater privileges and go to school and things like that, but it's not handed to you. Life without possibility of parole is a very harsh punishment. Then when we think, we really need to think about victims when we have this discussion. So California Crime Victims for Alternatives to the Death Penalty is one of the fastest growing organizations in this state for victims. We now have over 700 members. These members recognize that the death penalty does nothing to improve criminal justice, and it leaves so many people waiting for justice. This is a heavy burden on these family members, and it's so unfair. I know that many of these crimes are horrific, but I know from firsthand experience the years of appeals, the retrials, and more appeals is so hard on the family members. Life without possibility of parole provides legal closure. These families do not have to relive these crimes over and over again in the media. And then, what about those of us who carry out the punishment? I tell this story. When the Troy Davis execution was about to happen, we had done everything that we normally do. Organizations all across this country wrote letters, asked them to stop the execution, all the things that we do. I came to work the day of the execution and said, there must be something else we can do. So I got on the phone and was able to contact 5 other wardens beside myself, including the former warden of Georgia. And we all signed a letter and sent it to Georgia, and it said this: there is too much doubt. We don't know whether Troy Davis is innocent. We don't know whether he's guilty. But we just think of what you're doing to your staff. They will have to live with what they will do tonight for the rest of their lives. You can't end doubt, but you can end the death penalty. As someone from law enforcement, I must tell you what DNA has taught us. DNA has taught us not to believe everything we think. So DNA is only available in less than 20% of homicide cases. But what we have learned from DNA is that we've made many mistakes in our criminal justice system and that innocent people have been executed. So I can tell you that from my experience with 4 executions and from really growing up with the death penalty inside the criminal justice system, that the concern about innocence continues to grow, as it should. And what Proposition 34 will do will ensure that we never execute an innocent person. But I always tell audiences this. At the end of every execution, someone in my staff would turn to me every single time, and they would say, "Is the world safer because of what we did tonight?" And we would look at each other, and no one answered that question because we knew the answer was no. We had done nothing to improve public safety. We had done nothing to improve the world. So as a practitioner, I can tell you that so many people who have been involved with the death penalty are supporting our effort. In my own organization, Death Penalty Focus, we now have 134 current and former criminal justice professionals who've signed on to support our effort to replace the death penalty in this state. My journey, like so many others, has brought me to do everything I can to replace the death penalty. Prop 34 will do that. I think it's important that you know what Prop 34 will do. It is a very simple initiative, and as you talk to your neighbors, it's important that you know what it does. 3 things. It takes the existing law, it crosses out death penalty, and leaves life without possibility of parole as the harshest punishment in this state. It requires that all inmates serving life without possibility of parole work and pay restitution into the Victims' Compensation Fund. And finally, it sets aside $100 million over 3.5 years for the sole purpose of solving unsolved homicides and unsolved rapes. Life without possibility of parole is cheaper, it is effective, and it keeps us safe. So we need your help. The facts speak for themselves. If you are interested in helping with our effort, please contact safecalifornia.org. The polls are in our favor. What we have learned from our recent polling is that when the voters have the facts, 54% of the voters are with us on this issue. We have the opportunity in November to close the largest death row in the United States of America. We are at the right place at the right time. So please, yes on 34. Thank you.